Testing, this is Mike McCammon. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Hello and welcome everyone to, we have a couple of microphones here, hold on. Hello, this is Mike McCammon. Welcome to the OWASP Virtual AppSec Days conference. We're glad all of you could join us today. We've gone through a lot of rehearsing, so everything should go well. My name is Mike McCammon, and I'm the Executive Director of the OWASP Foundation. I'd like to welcome you this morning. I want to apologize first off for the quick email you got an hour ago, letting you know that we were starting in 15 minutes. That was my mistake. Hopefully we were able to correct that on your behalf. And again, I'm sorry about that. That was my fault. Our first hope is, of course, is that you, your friends and colleagues are doing well. Obviously, the worldwide pandemic, COVID-19, has changed a lot of our plans. You'll hear a little bit more about that later in this presentation. What the foundation, its board of directors, leaders, and members decided would be a good idea is to try to take some of our programming online in an effort to bridge the gap of trying to find our new normal, if you will. So I do want to thank you for joining us today. Yes, we are going to go ahead and get started. The OWASP Foundation, if you're not familiar with us, we do endeavor to improve the security of the world's software. We do that through a variety of different activities. Certainly, we have our community-led projects, but also our local chapters worldwide, conferences and trainings as well. There are many different ways to become involved in the foundation. I would certainly encourage you, once this conference is over, to do that. You can become a paying member of the foundation to support our work. You can also join local chapters, which currently are on hiatus. Their local meetings until some of the gathering bans have been postponed. But also projects are one activity, and we'll be hearing from one of our project leaders as well today. of activities that are going on within the foundation. I'd also like to point out that we do have a very active global conference schedule. We do at least 2 global events per year. Our Dublin event was originally planned for June, but it's been postponed until February of next year. San Francisco is still currently planned for this October. You can find out more information about both of those conferences on our website. One other thing that I do want to make a quick announcement about is that the foundation does have a big commitment to the AppSec community. We opened up a scholarship program for those impacted by the coronavirus to take some of the training classes that'll be on Tuesday and Wednesday this week. And we're proud to announce that we were able to distribute over $15,000 of scholarships for individuals that requested those as part of being able to take those classes. And I wanted to make the offer that you too can make donations to help us do this for future attendees by going to owas.org/donate to help us do this for our next conference. We do this usually for both our global events as well as for our online events. And so I would encourage you to take part in that if you would like to. So our lineup today will be Michael Coates, Mark Goodwin, and Andrew. I'll be introducing them here in a few more seconds. I want to thank all 3 of them for taking some time away from their busy schedules to join us today. I know they have just as big, if not a bigger commitment to making sure that all of us stay connected in these times. And we want to thank them very much for volunteering their time today and giving us a quick talk. And then finally, before we start, I do want to thank our event sponsors. There are 4 organizations that have stepped forward to help defer the financial cost of putting on this conference. I'd like to thank all 4 of them. I will tell you that as the landing screen said early on, and your reminder emails tell you that if you go visit any one of these 4 sponsors, which you can find the links on appsecdays.org/sponsors/swag, and many of them are actually providing free giveaways for individuals that sign up for demos of their products. Just like if we were having a real conference with a exhibition, kind of think of it as the virtual exhibition room. And with that, I will say thank you for all your support. And our first speaker today will be Michael. And I'll stop my sharing. I'll turn over to Mike.
There we go. We should be live if all of our technical connectivity is still working well. Thanks, Internet, and everyone joining. I'm super excited to be here for this lightning talk. This is a really exciting opportunity. Certainly, times are changing, and our ability to be nimble and adjust to these realities and still keep the communication going is amazing. So that's really fantastic. A little bit about myself. I'm currently the CEO and co-founder of a company called Altitude Networks. That is a startup that is 2 years old. I was previously the CISO of Twitter, and I've served as head of security for Mozilla. I was on the OWASP board for 6 years, 3 of those as the chairman, so I have strong ties to OWASP and the entire community. And I've been in the information security space in one way or another for a little over 15, 16 years, something like that. What I'm going to talk about here for the next 20-ish minutes is building and growing an application security team. I've done that as an individual, I've done that as a manager, but what I want to talk about is the perspective from, from a CISO. In that lens, what are they looking at? What does success mean? What are the important areas? How should we step away from the individual cross-site scripting, output encoding, et cetera, and say, well, how does this work in a larger organization? And in what ways might it be measured on? This will be quick, as these lightning talks are. We could talk at length about this, and I hope you reach out on Twitter and we can continue the conversation. But let's go ahead and dive in to that. So first of all, in a lightning talk, we're going to be moving quickly. I'd love to discuss this with you, and I'll be keeping some bullets on the screen for reference points if there is material you want to screenshot. But I'm going to talk about the CISO. What is their mindset? Why do they care? Why do they care about AppSec? What is a successful AppSec program from their perspective? And what are the things that I've learned and seen effective in building that AppSec team as well. And then, of course, I'll say goodbye and hand it over to other people. So let's jump into this. So the CISO role, just stepping back from AppSec, the CISO role is really misunderstood and confusing and different everywhere. In some regards, we see the CISO as the person with their head on the chopping block, the person that should prevent every single vulnerability from ever happening at a company. And if one happens, it's their fault directly, and they are the ones taken to task because of it. And this is actually really challenging, because if that were the case, then the CISO would be the person who was responsible for every risk and then have the authority to stop every risk, which would be quite an odd business model for any company to route every single decision through the CISO to say yes or no. But instead, what they need to be doing is building a comprehensive security program, thinking about all the different angles, everything from AppSec to OPSEC to endpoint security, cloud security, et cetera. So lots of different things on their plate. And when we think about the role of AppSec in it, it is one very large and important component amongst many as they build that comprehensive program. Now, in addition to that, that CISO is going to be thinking about communicating the success, the challenges, the risk areas, both to leadership, to their peers, to the C-suite. They're also going to be focusing on operationalizing their security teams. How do they actually achieve the objectives that they're doing? Working on things like responsibility of risk, who owns these different risk areas, and then rolling all of this up to the board. So already, as you're starting to think about it, when you're building your AppSec program, thinking about the CISO that you might be reporting to, they have all these other elements going on in their mind that they're thinking about. And so one of the tricks you can do as an application security leader or manager is being aware of all those different influences and funneling that into how you present your information, what items you roll up, what things become top priorities and concerns, et cetera. Now, as I was saying moments ago, and this is really tricky when you come from the practitioner, when you are in there actually finding the vulnerabilities and fixing them, it's really tricky to step back and say, wait, the goal is not to eliminate all security bugs. And the reason is because the incremental effort to take out that last percentage of bugs is not worth the trade-off per se. There's always a healthy balance of risk in any organization. And so it's a really odd thing for us to wrap our heads around as technologists, that we don't actually want to fix them all. We want to figure out the most important security bugs, have a consistent methodology for risk rating, and build that into the larger structure of a company so that they can build risk management. Now, so when we're thinking about this from the CISO perspective, what is their role and goal in the organization? On one hand, we have this antiquated thinking of they stop every vulnerability from happening, and if they don't, they get fired, which I'm here to tell you is not a way that works. Instead, they actually want to empower risk management and enable the business to move fast and make informed risk decisions. Because one of the things that we're here for at all levels of security is to demystify this space. If we left it to Hollywood, if we left it to newspapers, all of security would be getting in a dark room, hacking real fast with a hoodie on. And I don't know about you, but I think we all know that that's not the reality that we're in. It's much more nuanced, and it really comes back to how does fixing this issue in this way empower the business, or how does, given this understanding of the security issue, enable a business leader to make a decision about whether or not they should release the product feature 1 week later and suffer the losses in the market for not delivering it and take that risk, or go ahead and release it earlier and take the risk, and knowing what the potential trade-offs are about it. So quickly here, as I kind of introduce the CISO mindset, what I'm trying to really show is that everything I talked about was not about the technical details. It was more about how do we consider the security implications in the scope of application security into a larger sense of business success, business motivations, things like that. So an important thing about that CISO is to have enough technical understanding to communicate well with their AppSec team. But we also need to recognize from the other side, as an AppSec individual, as an AppSec leader, they're going to be coming at it from this lens of what does this mean in a larger business? How do I drive success with other teams when thinking about security from this perspective? All right, now, why does the CISO care so much about AppSec in particular amongst all the other things? And this, I think, really speaks to the power of what we are doing when we think about secure software, secure code. And it's kind of captured, in my opinion, in these 2 points. But secure code is going to empower technology. And if nothing else, this is, in fact, a living, breathing example of it. We have been confined to our respective homes around the world, and we are still connected via live video streaming, live discussion. Like, communication is happening in a way that it wouldn't have happened of 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and certainly not longer. Technology is amazing in what it's going to do for the world. And the reason technology can do what it will do is because of secure, responsible software. And that's what we're building in the AppSec programs. So of all the things we care about as a CISO, that is the power behind application security. And then the second part about that is a business. The lifeblood is not necessarily oil. Of course, oil is an important thing in the world. Data is the new oil. And protecting that is of the utmost importance, both from a business viability perspective and from a perspective of responsibility to people or consumers or customers. And so there's certainly a good reason for a CISO to think about lots of different security domains. They all have their place, but enabling our technology to be powerful and secure is a huge element. Now, what is a successful AppSec program? And I specifically want to talk about this from a CISO lens to illustrate the different ways we think about it. Because as I ask this question to each of you in your different roles and different perspectives, you probably have lots of different ideas that are all great and have good merits to them. And it's important for us to understand the different lenses that we look at it from. Now, from the CISO lens, I would say that one of the more important elements of a successful AppSec program is what I call a paved road approach. And this is a popular terminology that I certainly won't take credit for that term. It's one I heard earliest probably from Netflix, and I imagine tons of other people have used that term as well. But this is all about the mentality of how you engage your AppSec program with the business. This is establishing an easy path for developers and teams to take that is the most secure way for them to do something. And so what this really speaks to is the tone at which your security program is created. Instead of being a choke point gate that everyone has to go through and you wield a big hammer, which is very much an old approach to security, you are empowering companies, empowering teams within the company to choose to go through your path because they get security by default. They get the best additional controls that have been built into that process. And it is considered the easiest way to do things while also getting security. What this does is it puts the onus of responsibility of security into the team's hands themselves versus the security team being a check that says, oh yes, we have confirmed this is all good, you may proceed. And the reason that is important is when you shift from the old model of the security team has blessed something to the new model where teams actually are responsible for security, you're moving that burden of ownership of risk to them. And that's really important because what you'll see in companies where security does the checkbox or the stamp approval is that the developer teams are incentivized to just get that stamp no matter what. And that moves towards this notion of pushing away responsibility and ownership of security, and at times even hiding security issues. So when a team knows that they are responsible for it, that definitely changes the mindset and really will help increase your security program. The other thing that it does is it lets teams take alternate approaches with technology and decisions if they choose to, but they know that when they do that, there's a certain set of responsibilities they still have to fulfill. So you're really saying, do you want to take path A or path B? Path A has all the security controls built in, and yes, you're using this stack, you're using these elements, and that is a little bit more rigid. If you want to take path B and do things your own way a little bit different, that's also okay. You need to create all of these different security controls as well. And as you're thinking about that, you can think how, why would a team really want to take that alternate path unless there's a huge ROI for that? So the paved road approved approach represents a lot of different things, but I think it's a key element to a successful program. Now, the other item that I look at and say this makes a program successful is if the perspective and the mind has shifted from looking at individual counts of security bugs to shifting to solving root control weaknesses. So it would not be successful if I had an AppSec team and they said, well, we found another 100 cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. From one side, if you were finding those, you might feel great. Like, all right, I found another one. I feel good. Bug hunting, it makes sense. From an AppSec program, that's a failure because why is it possible to keep having the mistake? Why have we not gone back to the base principles and said, can we fix this in the framework itself so it's not even possible to have the issue? And it is harder to do that because you have to obviously work in code and work with developers or have an engineering team in security to do that itself. But that is the measure of what I find a successful program to be. You first do the bug hunting to find the problems and to think creatively and to find where things have fallen apart, and then channel those individual problems back into fixing the root structure so that those issues either can't happen again, or if they can happen, they're caught in the development pipeline where you have alerting and bugs go back to the developers themselves to fix the issues. On that note of pipelines, operating at scale is huge. One thing I learned from both Mozilla and Twitter, and actually working directly with both of the other panelists at different times, what a small world this is that you will get the best and the brightest people, and they will only scale so much because we are all humans. There's no way we can fight computer vulnerabilities at the speed of humans, so we have to operate at scale. It is exciting to build tools. You should also realize that when doing things at scale in a company, that buying the right security tool and integrating it into your workflows is a really good move because you are outsourcing the maintenance and ongoing feature development of that tool. The challenge of building things yourself is it's only a priority until that person is on the project or rolls off. And that can be really challenging. But one of the challenges we have collectively as a security industry is the challenge of focusing on interesting, nuanced innovations while not thinking about accuracy. The most important thing I think you could do for operating at scale is prioritize accuracy so you can trust your results and then drive them through workflow automation. If I give you 1,000 results and you have to have a human manually verify them because 500 of them are wrong, that is not saving you time. Get 400 results, of which 390 of them are accurate, and then you can push that through automation. Then you can build trust, you can kick things back to developers in real time, you can kick them to other teams that own them, and you decentralize your security by having that trust in the validity of the issues so other people can work, fix them, and own them if they created the issue. And along that line, security teams do not own risk. This is a big shift we need to keep making in the security industry. If we are the owners of risk, then we are incentivized to stop all innovation because that brings risk. The people that do the innovation, that do the creating of new code, of software apps, they need to own the risk themselves. So they have the incentive to maintain the right level of risk. And you can do this by having roll-ups of vulnerabilities by programs or by apps or by business owners. And this is a really effective way to build an internal scorecard where your CISO will show this at the C-suite meeting or whatever appropriate leadership meeting. And suddenly you've got Joe, Betty, and Bob, and you see their respective risk scores in their AppSec, in their programs that they own, in their applications. Now, you may have gotten good buy-in from those individuals that security matters because they just intrinsically think that is true. But maybe one of them doesn't. Maybe one of them has a different incentive structure in their mind and thinks, well, we'll just roll the dice. That works until their name pops up on that scorecard and they are dramatically lower than everyone else. Suddenly they still don't care perhaps about security, but they do care about being last. And they will bump up their scores just because of that incentive. So it's really effective and it's an important element of establishing risk ownership across the business. Last, along that line, being metrics based. It is really easy to think about the latest burning fire. It's easy to over-rotate with recency bias. And so that's why it's important to have the actual metrics behind you so you can look at where things are going and make more objective decisions based on that. The element of org reporting is important, as I just mentioned. And then the other thing is there's always something bad happening. And to the point of kind of recency bias, you need to have a crisp risk management program with your formulas of how you determine what's most important. Otherwise, you will get the challenge of the burning fires, where, oh, there's this new thing, new headline, and we need to go focus on that. Every time you shift focus, you are saying that the thing that just happened is more important than every other thing that we're already looking at. And that is really, really challenging. There's a little trick you can do. Imagine you're getting fired. This is a really weird trick, but imagine you're getting fired because you didn't do something right. Your boss comes to you and says, how dare you have not fixed this issue? How did this problem happen? What you can do when that happens is think, was the thing I was working on right now more important than any other possible thing that I knew about that could have come my way? And it's kind of a quick risk prioritization activity that you can do to say, am I focusing my team and myself on the most important thing right now? Excuse me. Now, on the topic of a successful app team, hiring is challenging. It's really tough to get great people. We know that the industry has basically negative unemployment. There's a job that you have, there's another job on the table, there's more things that could be done at any point in time. So here are some tricks that I found successful to build those successful programs. Now, the first thing is thinking about the security unicorn. I've seen teams say, well, we don't necessarily have as many recs as we want. Therefore, I'm going to try and jam all of the different roles that I want into one person. Now, what do you think happens during interviews when you're looking for that role? What you can expect is you always find a reason that someone is not the right candidate. Oh, they're really good on pen testing, but they just don't have the development experience we need. They can see the big picture, the architect, but they can't do a buffer overflow. I'm like, well, can't hire them. This is a big challenge. So what you need to do to make this more effective is have crisp defined roles inside the security team and actually document and capture the focus of that role and the skills that are needed for it. And not only write that down, but communicate that to the rest of your team and the interviewing body. Now, I've done that as much as saying, we're going to hire a security engineer, but then taking it the next step further and saying, here are the 5 top traits for that role, and here are the relative strengths we need in it. So this is where you actually get to say, we need them to understand core security principles at a expert level, maybe like a level 5, if you have like a 1 through 5 rating. We need them to be able to understand reading code and finding vulnerabilities at a mediocre level. So this way, when someone goes and interviews them, they don't say, well, they're not an expert at this skill, therefore they're not good for the role. And you get the actual right level for each skill and the right understanding, which is really key. Now, to supercharge your recruiting process, one of the things that you should do, if you're not already, is sitting down with your recruiter and your sourcer. You'd be surprised how many people say, oh, I just can't get good candidates. My HR team, they just don't know what they're doing, blah, blah, blah. Like, well, have you actually talked to them about the role? And one thing that you can do is give your recruiter, your sourcer, security questions to pre-screen candidates. Now, obviously, the recruiter is not an expert in AppSec, But what you want to do is make sure that as you think about your funnel of recruiting, you're getting the right people at the right stages. So you're not having your limited engineering security resources being burned talking to people that are just the wrong people for the role entirely. So if you're hiring someone in a web security role, have your sourcer ask them, explain cross-site scripting to me. And what I did for my sourcer was I said, here are 3 different answers they could give. Here's one that is going to indicate they definitely know exactly what they're talking about. Here's one that is like, well, they're in the ballpark. And then here's some things they might say if they have no idea. Now, this, again, the sourcer is not going to know that issue, but they're going to pattern match. And they're going to talk to people like, oh, this person is definitely hitting these keywords, output encoding, input validation, all of these things versus, oh, it's a web security problem, which could obviously be a concern if that's all someone said. But this is a good way of really empowering your recruiters to work for you. Now, within your team itself, don't just send them all out into battle and say, guys, figure it out. Guys and gals, figure this out. You're just going to do everything. Again, no security unicorns. Build an actual skills matrix of what things your team does in terms of responsibility, what things people need to know, and map. And I've done this publicly inside my teams. Have everybody put in, I'm an expert in this, or I'm weak in this, but want to learn, or I don't know this. And then suddenly you see all the core activities in your team that you have to do. And you see all the people that can do them, and you start to know who can do what. What you'll find is some of your senior people are doing a bunch of work that is junior work, but they're only doing it because the junior person can't just jump in and figure it out. And so what I found in teams that I've built these pipelines with is that you have your senior people then build run books, build training materials, and hand off this work to junior candidates in the team. Now, suddenly your junior people are more excited because they have well-documented workflows that they can go learn security, be excellent, enhance. And your senior people have more time to do more work. Now, you couple that with a university inflow, or maybe something like the Year Up program, which I love so much. And now you have a way to take in very junior, even new people into a security program, move them into well-documented junior roles, let your junior people grow and succeed, and have your senior people focus on senior problems. And then they all move up together nicely. And so when we're in such a tough world with hiring and retaining talent, this is a really great technique to use. And the last thing is, man, we are in such technical roles, and we get focused on all the technical details. One of the things you can do to be successful, aside from all of this, is step out of that technical mindset, learn to write, learn to speak, learn to communicate. But as a leader of an AppSec team or program, when I look at that from, again, from that CISO lens, I want you to be creating a wonderful place to work. And this means providing people training, let them go to virtual conferences, I guess, real conferences when those return. Challenge them. Don't just burn them out with meaningless work. Understand what they want to do to grow and talk to them. Have one-on-ones. I hope that's not a crazy idea to everyone, but have real one-on-ones that aren't status updates. Find out what their motivations are and challenges. Encourage them to write blogs, publish open source code, or do speaking themselves. But if you create an environment where people are challenged and excited and motivated, you will get the best out of them, and they will want to be there, and they will attract other people to you. And suddenly you'll have an amazing team. And as a CISO, the one thing that you can do is have amazing people around you, because you are not as much as you think. You are the result of your amazing team. Yes, that program is called Year Up. It is an interesting name because it sounds like Europe, but Y-E-A-R, second word, U-P. So these are lightning talks. I've touched on a lot of different ideas. It's quick. I'd be happy to talk to you, for hours on this stuff, and I often do. But hopefully these were a few ideas that you can take back and think about, spark some thinking in your mind. And the internet is a wonderful place. So there's my Twitter account. You can tweet at me and I'll respond, especially right now. So don't hesitate if there's more discussion to be had. Really appreciated all your time. This was such a great event. Love the OWASP organization, and I will yield back my time.
All right. Thanks, Michael. We are back to, yeah, great. So yeah, thanks so much, Michael, and everyone did see you had your Twitter handle there. Real quickly before I pass to Mark, just want to remind everybody, I did forget to mention early on, that the virtual AppSec Days does have this conference today, and then there's 11 training classes that start tomorrow, the same time this session started. Registration will still be open for a couple more hours today. If you're interested in joining any of those training classes, I'd encourage you to go back to the appsecdays.org website for more details. And now I'll pass it off to Mark, and welcome Mark Goodman to the virtual stage.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us all today. I want to start off by thinking a little bit about the journey of the web platform. And in particular, I want to start off by thinking about it from the perspective of someone working at Mozilla. And I'd like to do that because when our last speaker actually hired me to work at Mozilla 9 years ago now, Mozilla wasn't really in a place that it wanted to be. Having been the browser for a while that all the cool kids used, the fast, lightweight alternative to some of the other things out there, there was a new competitor in the marketplace, and we found ourselves in a place where, in various points of view, in particular from security, whereas we had been the good alternative, we were perhaps behind in a few areas. And in the time that I've been working in the various security engineering teams at Mozilla, a lot of that has changed. We've gone from this place where things were pretty bad to having closed the gap somewhat in terms of the technologies in use. But we've also made some changes that benefit everyone. We've made some changes to the web platform, which you get to benefit from today. And in particular, we've made some changes to the technologies which are used for transport layer security, in particular the web PKI and how you can make sure that you trust the entities you're talking to on the internet. And I think it's really useful for us as technologists to understand how some of these things work. And so I want to talk about revocation. I want to talk about certificates and how it is that we can come to distrust things that previously we might have trusted. So a little bit of background about myself. I've worked at Mozilla for a few years now. Before that, I used to rob banks for a living. At Mozilla, I've done some fun things. I've been involved with a bunch of platform stuff, things like cryptographic engineering, web PKI things. I've also done a lot of content security work. So if any of you have heard of same-site cookies, that was my thing. I first announced that publicly at AppSec Island years ago. So that was an OWASP event. And that's since gone on to be something that's in all the browsers. And my previous job at Mozilla was cryptographic engineering, and I've had first-hand experience of the bunch of stuff that I'm going to be talking about today. So certificates, we all know what a certificate is. We know that when we are visiting a website, we are to look for indicators in the browser to tell us that we have a secure connection. And then that secure connection is secure by nature of the fact that not only can we be sure of the identity of the server that we're talking to, but we can also be sure that the communications we have with that server are private and that the integrity of the data is all good. And a certificate is simply a cryptographic thing that allows you to verify the identity of some entity. And when we're talking in the context of the web, well, we're talking about websites. And you're able to trust the identities that you find using your web browser because of a few conditions that are met. You're able to trust them because some authority is satisfied enough with the entity's identity to issue a certificate. So the certificates authority in this case finds out that somebody is who they say they are and issue a certificate to them. Your browser trusts the authority enough to honor the assertion that's been given on that identity. And it does that because you trust your browser to make good trust decisions. Your browser has built into it a bunch of root certificates, which it uses to establish a chain of trust between the certificate that the server has given you and something that the web browser has at the beginning of the process established some form of trust with. So there's an analogy we can use here. In most countries, we have some form of driving license that's issued to people who are allowed to drive cars. In the United Kingdom, which is where I'm based, that's called the DVLA. These authorities can issue documents, in these cases licenses, and we trust that authority, the driving and vehicle licensing agency, to give us that piece of paper to say that we can drive. Okay, so that at a really high level gives us an overview of how this particular building block of the web platform works. Now, when we have one of these certificates, what we have is some information that is signed by an authority. And by nature of what's happening here, what you essentially have is a mathematically provable assertion that the server, the entity you're talking to, has one end of a key pair of which the server has just served you the other in the certificate. And by nature of the thing that's happening here, it's something that's binary. Either you have established this trust, either this proof has been made, or it hasn't. And so there are situations where this thing can go wrong. So some of you will have heard, for example, of Heartbleed. Perhaps you remember that. That was a situation where there was a software vulnerability which led to information leakage from some web servers. And attackers could gather information from affected servers and piece together parts of the primary key, parts of the private key that we used to secure communication to that site. And because of that, there had to be lots of certificates revoked to cope with the fact that this vulnerability had affected lots of different sites. So that's one situation where things can go wrong. There are other things that can happen as well. For example, what happens if one of your certificate authorities issues a certificate that it should not have issued? Again, we don't like this sort of thing to happen, but occasionally it does. Or what if a certificate authority's systems are configured properly and the processes they have in place are all good, but some people in black suits go and visit the boss of the company, and the company is compelled to make a certificate for a particular purpose? You might find yourself in a situation where your browser thinks something is trustworthy, where in fact it isn't. Or what happens if the CA is compromised? Or what happens if the keys are stolen? And all of these things are really bad things that we really don't want to happen. And yet all of these things are things that have happened even in just the last few years. We've had instances of all of these things in the web platform and the web PKI, relatively recently speaking. So things can go wrong. And the question is, in cases where these things go wrong, what do we do? What options do we have? Now, in the case of a driver's license, if the authority wants to revoke that license, they can compel you to return the document. And because there's only one copy of that document, you can be reasonably sure that they can't then show that document to someone else. But obviously, digital certificates are digital. There are many different copies of them at any point in time. You can't recall all of the bits back across the internet, so you need some other mechanism. And that's where revocation comes in. Revocation is the set of mechanisms by which you can digitally say, this certificate that I previously issued, it was good when I issued it, but now there's something wrong, and I need you not to trust it anymore. And so there are a bunch of different things which over time have been used to provide this functionality. The first is something called certificate revocation lists, CRLs. You may well have heard of these. These are just a structure which contain the issuer and serial number of each certificate which a certificate authority wishes to revoke. They're fairly simple in terms of how the data is structured and what they provide, but they have a number of drawbacks. The first is that the revocation list grows order n with respect to the number of certificates in the list, so they don't scale especially well, especially when you think about how many billions of websites there are on the internet. But also, every time there's an update to one of these lists, you have to fetch the whole list again. So over time, the amount of data you have to transfer to each client to get this information to them is vast. And for these reasons, CRLs are generally not respected by browsers, generally not respected by the user agent. And so browser vendors got their heads together and came up with something called OCSP, which means Online Certificate Status Protocol. And this provided a different mechanism. What could happen is you'd get your certificate, and at the time you wanted to use the certificate, you'd have a look at the revocation point inside the certificate and say, okay, is this still good? And you'd talk to the CA and they'd say, yes, it's still good, or no, it isn't. And you could make your decision then. And the problem with this is that whilst this is slightly better in terms of the scale than certificate revocation lists, it introduces two problems. The first is a latency. When you're trying to establish a TLS connection to the server, you need to check that the certificate you've got is good. And the second is that there is an avenue for information to be leaked. Certificate authorities could theoretically have different certificate revocation points for each of their certs, and they'd know which sites users were visiting by the information that came through status checks in OCSP. And so this was developed to something called OCSP stapling, whereby rather than requesting the revocation information from the CA directly, you would instead staple that OCSP token, the response, to the server hello when you're initiating a TLS conversation. And browser vendors have also done something to patch some of the holes here. Chromium has something called CRL sets, Edge has something called CTLs, and Firefox has something called 1CRL. And these are all browser vendor mechanisms for making sure that timely information, it finds its way to users' browsers without necessarily relying on one of these other features. The last thing I want to mention in terms of the actual revocation mechanisms is something called OCSP must staple. And this is a combination of OCSP stapling and a TLS feature extension in the X509 standard, where you can create a certificate that demands that whenever it's used, a OCSP token is stapled in the server hello when you make a connection. This is a really good idea, in my opinion. Unfortunately, Firefox is the only browser that implements it, and for reasons I'll go into shortly, then it's not something that's been picked up much by other browser vendors. Some other things worth mentioning while we talk about some of these technologies. Firstly, some of you might remember HPKP, that was HTTP public key pinning. This was a feature that allowed you to say, from now on, every time you come to this website, I want you to make sure that the certificate chain contains one of a number of keys to make sure that people can't issue certificates that we don't expect. This was a good idea for a while. Unfortunately, it is somewhat open to abuse, and so HPKP was phased out initially by Chromium and then by Firefox. Another thing, CAA, Certificate Authority Authorization. This is a DNS resource record mechanism, which you can use to say that certificates for resources on a particular domain can only be provided by a particular CA. And the final thing, a notification. Some of you may have heard of something called certificate transparency. This will be useful to understand in a moment, but certificate transparency is a cryptographically assured mechanism to allow browsers, well, any client really, to find out whether or not, well, to find out what certificates have been issued for a particular domain. Okay, so that gives you some of the words behind some of the things happening in the web PKI space at the moment. Now, to draw these together, I want to make the point that probably the best thing we have at the moment in terms of a robust way of providing revocation information is OCSP must staple. I'd like to reiterate that unfortunately there's only one browser that currently implements this, and that's for a bunch of reasons. But that's not to say that browsers haven't tried to do anything. I mentioned the 1CRL, CRL set, CTL things. These are attempts that some browser vendors have made to plug some of the gaps in the existing revocation mechanisms. And the people at Safari have actually done some interesting work on this. And what they wanted to do was have a mechanism similar to 1CRL or CRL sets, but they didn't want to have to ship very much data to the client. And so they made use of something called Bloom filters. You may have heard of Bloom filters before. The very short version of how a Bloom filter works is you take a hashing mechanism, it doesn't matter which one you use. A hash function takes an input and maps a given input to a given output. You don't need to know the specifics of how it works, but the thing you need to remember is that every time a particular input is given, the same output will be given. Okay, so imagine we have a hash function here, which takes a string and gives you an 8-bit output. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a Bloom filter of all of the names in our name list that are palindromes, are the same forward as they are backwards. So we can take a word, a name, Anna here, and hash that, and then take the bits from the output and set bits in our bit array to match the bits that are set in this output here. We do the same for Hannah. You'll notice that one of these bits was already set, but we can add another one here. And we then, from the resulting bit array, have something we can look up later. And when we look up Anna, because the bits here are set, it would say, yes, this is probably a palindrome. If we were to look at Hannah, it'd say, yes, this is probably a palindrome as well. But here's a key point. This is probabilistic, which means sometimes you'll get mistakes. So here, for example, you have the name Marcus. The bits of Marcus are also set in our bit array. So it looks like we've got a positive here, but it's a false positive. And what this allows Safari to do is when it has a certificate that looks like it might be bad from the Bloom filter lookup, it can then go and perform a check on that, which means that it can be done in a way that is faster, less resource intensive, and doesn't affect the latency of most connections. Unfortunately, because it's probabilistic, it's not bulletproof, and so you can't have it fail closed. Now, I mentioned certificate transparency earlier on. The reason I wanted to mention it is because certificate transparency allows us to have a particular property of the web PKI, which is useful. And that is, since the date when each browser started to require CT, we can be certain that we know the full set of browsers, of certificates issued in the web PKI. And we know all of the certificates after a particular date. And that means we can do some fun tricks with mathematics and computer science. And in particular, we can do something called CRL Lite. Now, this started from some academic research and has found its way into browsers. It's currently shipping now as a test in Firefox. And it provides CRL-like properties in that you can have a comprehensive list of everything that needs to be revoked, but the data is tiny and you can ship the data as a series of small diffs. And so it scales well and it builds on useful properties of things like certificate transparency. How does it work? Well, let's think about our Bloom filter from earlier on. We had this false positive here where there were bits set in our bit array by accident, by nature of the fact that we've got a whole load of inputs in a smaller output space. Now, what we do is we simply add different layers. Every time we have a false positive, we have a filter of false positives, and then we have a filter of false negatives of the false positives, and then we have another filter of the other false values from that, and so on and so forth, until there's nothing wrong anymore. And then you have, built from a series of probabilistic data structures, you have a deterministic data structure, which tells you whether any name in your dictionary is a palindrome, or more usefully, in certificates, whether or not a given certificate is revoked. So what happens next? Well, this is a Firefox thing. It's intended to augment things like 1CRL rather than the public revocation information in the web PKI. There's no real reason why it couldn't apply to individual CAs and the data they provide, but there's no strong cross-browser drive to improve things. Part of the reason for this is that a lot of the people who work in cryptographic engineering and web PKI are slightly worried that revocation could be used as a censorship mechanism. There are also some technical hurdles to overcome before we can rely on revocation to completely protect us against attacks on web applications. In particular, things like service workers and caching can result in attacks poisoning browser state after an attack has ceased and a certificate has been revoked. And we'd need to figure out how to fix some of those things as well. Now, that's all I wanted to talk about. I gather there's going to be some time for Q&A later, but if no one wants to ask a question now, you can always send me questions on Twitter. Thank you very much.
So thanks, Mark. I'm going to leave that QR code up there just for a few more seconds. All right, hopefully you just see. Actually, you haven't given back the screen. So I'll take the screen and I'll go back to the deck. Cool. Thanks again, Mark. Also, there's your Twitter handle as well. So lots of different ways to get a hold of folks. All right, our final speaker for today is Andrew Vanderstock. Many of you know Andrew for his work on the top 10. We'll be hearing a little bit of an update on that as well. So I'll turn the floor over to Andrew.
Thank you. Let's just
Perfect. We can see your screen. We can see your screen just fine.
Fantastic. That was my question. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. There's way more of you than I thought, and that's fantastic. It shows that these virtual events can work, and I'm really hopeful that we can continue these even afterwards. Okay, about me, I'm an OWASP Lifetime member. I'm going to plug OWASP Lifetime membership. It's the most inexpensive way of helping OWASP long-term. It's actually one of the best value things I've ever done. I did it when I was on a board. It was fantastic. So if you are thinking about committing some funds to OWASP at this difficult time, if you can afford to spare them, OWASP Lifetime membership is an amazing benefit. I was on the OWASP board from 2015 to 2018. I was treasurer from 2016 through 2018. One of the things that I do for a long time is I've been the co-lead of the OWASP Application Security Verification Standard, along with Josh Coleman, Daniel Cuthbert, and to some extent, Jim Manico. And also I was a co-lead the OWASP Top 10. I worked on the OWASP Developer Guide 2.0. That's how I got into contributing to OWASP all those years ago. I've released the OWASP Top 10 2007 and 2017, and I've been pretty much the person who's been working on the ASVS for the last decade. I wasn't there for 1.0, but I was certainly aware of its genesis. I also worked on ES API for PHP, and I'm terribly sorry about that, but unfortunately, even with the release of PHP 7, that's still not Unicode, so therefore it can't pass basic. Well, it's not fit for the internet, so please don't use ES API for PHP. It's got some nice features, but they aren't useful. Okay, my other co-leaders were Neil Smithline, Brian, and Torsten. Neil, along with me, we do analysis, authoring, QA, and Neil's probably the strongest devil's advocate for inclusion or non-inclusion in our team. I love having conversations with Neil because he makes you intellectually honest, and it's fantastic. Brian is our data scientist and analysis. The reason he got involved in 2017 is he wrote us the most wonderful constructive criticism over 3 blog posts. And if you are interested in getting involved, what Brian did, which was to provide constructive help, it wasn't fun to read it, but it was actually the right thing. And so he got included on our team, and I really appreciate Brian's advice and mentorship in data science. And Torsten's actually been doing the OWASP Top 10 for longer than I have. He's actually been involved in the German translation for the longest time, and he should have been a key part of the OWASP Top 10 team much earlier than when I asked him to step up in 2017, because he was already doing it. And so he helps us with analysis, authoring, and he is by far, despite English being his second language, he is our quality assurance guru. So if there's mistakes, they're mine. If there's correct things, it's Torsten. He is like an amazing person finding problems in text, and I really appreciate his advice on that. He also looks after the OWASP website. We just did an update over the weekend which broke things for mobile. We'll try and fix that as quickly as we can. And he does the German translation, and that's what he's been involved in the longest. If you are interested in translating both the ASVS or the OWASP Top 10 into your language, and we don't have one at the moment, please contact us and I'll show you how that's done. It's pretty straightforward. What is the OWASP Top 10? I wrote this in the foreword to the OWASP Top 10 2007. It's foremost an education piece, an awareness piece, not a standard. Do not adopt this document as a policy or standard without talking to us first. The ASVS was a couple of years away at this point, but I was aware that it was being worked on. We still don't have secure coding policies at this point, but at the end of the day, basically, you can use the ASVS for that if you wish. Funny thing was, I wrote this in 2006, and then PCI DSS adopted it as pretty much its go-to for section 6.5, and no, they didn't talk to us first. I would have loved to have worked with them on the original PCI DSS. We could have come up with a much better list that was proactive, that was similar to the OWASP top 10 proactive controls. The OWASP top 10 is the exact wrong thing for that inclusion. So we'll talk about that in a bit. So what really do we think about the OWASP top 10? As co-leaders, we think about it as being an awareness piece. It is the bare minimum that you can implement and not be negligent. And so for that, we need you to be aware of web app security. So for us, it's really important that we are a lightweight, one page per thing awareness piece. We're not trying to teach you how to do SQL injection or LDAP injection or all those wonderful things in 300 words, which is roughly how many words we have on each page. So we can only do awareness, and as awareness, it is wildly successful. It's our most downloaded document, and it is one of those areas that we're very proud of the fact that many people come into contact for the first time because of the OWASP top 10, and therefore we have a duty to making each and every word count, and for that we are focused highly on awareness. It's developer-centric. OWASP's core mission from the very first days, despite what we actually did, should be developer-centric. If we want to have secure software, developers, we need to work with developers, and therefore we need to provide materials for them that they can actually action. If we're providing information to the community, the InfoSec community, we've failed, because everyone on this podcast, sorry, this virtual AppSec day, should already know all of this stuff. And we don't need to convert you. What we do need to do is reach out across the aisle to developers and work with them, not tell them, work with them what are the minimums, but also where they can get more information from. So we want to be developer-centric. Unfortunately, the methodology that creates the OWASP top 10 is self-referential. Because the methodology looks back at last year's data, everybody finds the things in the OWASP top 10 because it is the minimum, and therefore the OWASP top 10 becomes the OWASP top 10 the next time. We want to see some change, and so in 2017 we did implement a qualitative additions. We did that informally. For example, in 2007, I stuck CRSF in there with zero data, other than every single application on the planet had CRSF, and it was a big deal. And of course, we had the SAMI MySpace worm. We also had all these other ones, like a lot of Facebook account takeovers were through CRSF back in those days. So I stuck it in. Today, we would like to make sure the community is on board with what we stick in that we don't have data for. And we want to have some change. For example, CRSF was no longer part of the OWASP top 10 2017 because it got more or less solved. That is the goal. We want to solve these problems. I'd love to see bug classes being solved. And its number one use is being misused as a standard. And we're perfectly aware that this is happening. So what we're trying to do with 2017 and now 2020 is actually make it more easy to comply with. And we're going to talk a bit about that as we go on. So sadly, we do have some news. OWASP top 10 release cadence is roughly every 3 to 4 years. In the early days, this was very reliable. In fact, the first OWASP top 10 came out in 2003. Most people are sort of unaware of that one. The first one most people are aware of is actually the OWASP top 10 2004. And then there was the 2007, 2010, 2013. And then there was a bit of a hiccup and we had the 2017 version. There's a whole host of reasons why that one was delayed. And I do encourage you to go and refer to the talk I gave at AppSec Cali, at the 2018 AppSec Cali, if you are interested in that history. I don't want to revisit it. It was not necessarily a good time for OWASP, and we've definitely come back leaps and bounds since then. The thing I have to share with you today is we're not going to release it in 2020. This is a sad reality of the situation with the pandemic. There's a number of reasons why this is, and we tried to avoid this for as long as we possibly could, but it wasn't fair on everyone to keep saying we're going to release it in 2020 when in fact it was becoming more and more difficult for us to actually achieve that. So some of the reasons are we need to collaborate with organizations to obtain data. I don't want to have, this is the Andrew Vanderstock version of the OWASP top 10 because this is what I believe is happening today. The reality is organizations have access to a lot of data. In fact, vulnerability management platforms have never been more prevalent than they are now. So we want to get your data. And if you can share data with us, please contact me via Twitter DMs or DM the OWASP top 10 Twitter account, and we'll work with you on how we can best share. We'll talk about how that can happen. We need to perform data science and analysis, but if we can't get the data, that step is undoable. And you'll see in the schedule, we have some time to do that. In the 2017 version, we did that by ourselves with Brian's assistance over a period of 1 or 2 months. And we were receiving data all the way through that. And it was difficult to get to the right answer. And in fact, some of the biggest criticisms that are valid of the OWASP Top 10 2017 is maybe our data analysis could have been more thorough. And honestly, we need time for it. And if we're not able to get the data, we can't perform the data sciences to the level that we need. Lastly, and this is something that we shouldn't really be concentrating on, but we have to. If we issue a new OWASP Top 10, the industry has to start stepping up and adopting it. And if you're not aware that it's been released, or it's difficult for you to release, to adopt it right now because you don't have the staffing, because you've got much more important things to focus on, the OWASP Top 10 2020 wouldn't be really adopted in the same way as previous editions. And to do that, we need media mindshare. But at the moment, pretty much most of the media is like absolutely wall to wall with COVID stories. Now, our industry doesn't necessarily have that problem, but the wider mindshare that we're looking for talking to the developer industry, we're talking to the architecture industry, we're talking to all of these different people, and we need to get onto podcasts. We need to make sure that this is properly announced. And to do that requires some clear air. And at the moment, we don't see that clear air. And in fact, if indeed this has a second wave, which they're sort of predicting, when we were planning on releasing it at the AppSec USA or the San Francisco event later this year, we may not get any. And we had that problem in 2017 because we released it in the same week as Thanksgiving. And it wasn't until really 2018 that we got any mind share at all. And that was 3 months that we lost. And so we're just being realistic here. So what is our plan? We obviously have a plan. We are trying to target the Dublin event in February next year. These dates are subject to change. And in fact, the comments that I received from my co-leaders when they were proofing this deck were, are these dates real? I've brought them in a little bit. My goal is, and in fact, I think everyone on the team still wants to work on the OWASP Top 10 this year. And we want to complete the actual data collection this year to make it about the OWASP Top 10 2020. However, we don't know when that data collection will open up. We don't know when that data collection will close down, and therefore when we can get on with the analysis and writing. And we did find in the last time that the QA process, which went through 3 release candidates and then a golden master that we let out for a couple of days just to make sure that we had dealt with it, we are absolutely committed to peer review. And so if you do have time, keep an eye out on the Twitter and social media, like on Facebook or on Twitter or Reddit. Keep an eye out for when we release the release candidates so that you can actually provide us feedback. Some of our most important feedback was received after we'd finished writing it. So it was really important to get the community's feedback on that. Our goal is to get there for Dublin, which is currently scheduled for February next year. So there will be some changes between 2017 and 2020. And so we want to improve the data science. We're actually working with a small number of data scientists to ensure that the data can be reused by more than just the OWASP Top 10. I want to make sure that the ASVS and the testing guide and the proactive controls and anybody else who wants to use that data set can use it and ask it questions. Good data sets have depth, and we want to make sure that if we're going to ask you for something, we can get that depth. We want to have an improved community data-driven quality process. In 2017, it was essentially a Twitter poll that lasted 2 weeks. We did get 276 responses, which was good. But I think if we're going to ask the community for their input, we need to be able to nominate what they think are the important ones and then get a vote that more people can participate in. Because if we're going to have up to 2 items in the OWASP Top 10 2021, we want to make sure that the community is behind those new inclusions. We want to consider the possibility of allowing anonymous data submissions, and we're still working on how this might occur because we want to release the data publicly. Some data sets are such of a certain size that it can only be certain organizations. So how do we actually mix those together so that it becomes difficult to discern where that data came from? There's always going to be a risk of that. So we need to work on a data contributor agreement that holds us blameless in case it gets de-anonymized. If you are interested in submitting data anonymously, please talk to us now because we need to set up this protocol now before we start the actual data collection process. In the OWASP Top 10 2017, there were 43 CWEs across 10 items. And if you were looking at it from the MITRE Top 25, which concentrates on a single CWE in each of them, we were probably disingenuous, but also we wanted to share more than just a CWE. So for example, if we concentrated on just SQL injection in the A1, like it used to be, that doesn't belong in the OWASP Top 10 because, well, the reality is it's only in 2% of applications now and it wouldn't fall into it, yet the impact is so strong. It still belongs there, but along with some of its friends. But we want to reduce it and focus it. We want to focus our efforts deliberately upon a certain number, and we're going to do that with better focus. It's time for a new look and feel. The OWASP Top 10 2013 and 2017 all shared the same PowerPoint. It was difficult to translate, and we want more ways to consume it. We want to be mobile friendly. We know that the PDFs are probably not the highest way that most people consume it today, so we want that there. What won't change? We want to collect evidence from as many sources as we can. As I said, if you can help us with data, please help. Contact us via Twitter or on, I'm actually on Reddit and Facebook. I'm the administrator on the Facebook page. Do contact us and help us get more data. We want evidence-based data science. Just for example, the community had been behind, for example, password complexity policies, which are incredibly consumer hostile and completely and utterly ineffective, and that destroys our credibility. Now we're telling people, oh, you don't need to have complicated passwords and you don't need password rotation because they never worked. Well, they're going to look at you like, well, how can we trust you ever again? And the way we do that is through evidence. If it doesn't have evidence, it doesn't get in. And so we need data. We want to make sure the community is a part of this, and we want you to help us not only provide data, but also review it. And if you're able to contribute either translations, help writing, or whatever the case may be. For example, the XXE chapter was written by the 2 researchers who, Chris Hohoff, or I'm going to mangle the name, so I'm sorry. But the people who did the original research into XXE wrote that chapter, and we're really pleased that that was part of it. We want to continue linking with the other OWASP projects. We want you to be aware of them because, quite frankly, they're better at doing their specific tasks than the awareness piece of the OWASP Top 10. We want to keep aligned with other key standards, and I've got some outstanding emails to go through where we're trying to coordinate with organizations such as the World Economic Forum and others to provide a single standard. So when we say something about authentication, it's the same message as others. So you don't have to implement multiple things. It's important that we have data, but also alignment where possible. So we need your data. We do need help from data scientists. If you can assist us with that, please contact us. We want you to respond not only to the quality of inputs, but also the surveys that will end up being as part of that. We allow up to 2 elements in the OWASP top 10 to be chosen by the community. Help us choose them. Please peer review our content. If you've got questions, they're valid and we want to address them. So please do reach out. That's the Twitter handle that is the official account if you're interested in helping us out. And with that, that is me. Perfectly prepared to take questions via Twitter or social media. I don't know if we've got time for them at the moment, and I do want to make sure there is adequate time if there is to be such a thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. So what I'm going to do real quick, just a couple quick housekeeping items, and I'm going to toss up some ways for you to contact the speakers if you have some additional questions. Certainly, I want to thank everyone for their time today. Certainly the speakers, the volunteers, our staff that made all of this possible. Without all of your work, obviously, we would not be able to host such a really great virtual event. You will be receiving an email survey that we'd love for you to take some time to fill out here in the next hour or so. And we'd love to get your feedback so we can make this event better in the future. And what I will finally leave on the screen for the next few minutes is the Twitter handles of our speakers. As they all had kind of indicated, if you do have some questions or would like to have some side conversations, this would be their Twitter handles that you can reach them over on Twitter. The OWASP Foundation is just at OWASP. Mine is OWASPBD. And we thank everyone for their time today. Be safe, and we look forward to seeing you again soon and looking forward to an opportunity to getting back together as a community. Thanks again and have a great day.
Thank you.